This video will be a discussion of homeowners insurance. This comes from chapters 21 and 22 of the Rada McNamara text. Chapter 21 focuses on Section 1 of the homeowners insurance policy, and Chapter 22 focuses on Section 2. But we're going to look at it all together in this video, so it is a little longer than some of the other videos you have for this course. Let's first look at the definition and purpose of homeowners insurance. Homeowners insurance is a personal lines coverage protecting individuals and their families against the risks and perils associated with owning a home. Homeowners insurance policies are package policies. They're package policies because they include both Section 1, which is the property section, and that's coverages A through D, and Section 2, which is the liability section, which is coverages E and F. We'll look in a lot of detail at each one of those coverages as we go through this lecture. But first, these two sections make up all standard homeowners insurance policies, or forms. Let's now talk about what it means to be a package policy. Package policies combine two or more coverages and perils covered. For example, property and liability, and maybe 8 different perils covered. You'll see that one of the homeowners forms covers 8 perils, another covers 16 perils, and then yet a third one is an open perils policy. So we'll talk about what all that means today. There are several advantages to having a package policy. First, there are fewer gaps in coverage for insureds with a package policy. The insurance companies and the form makers have been in this business for a very long time, and they have contemplated all of the potential exposures that a homeowner might have, or in the case of auto insurance, an auto owner, or in the case of a business owner. All of those have package policies associated with them. And so while an insured may not anticipate a need for a certain type of coverage, the package policy sometimes gives them coverage even though they didn't know they had the exposure. Also, the insured gets a premium discount for buying more from the same insurer and in the same policy. And it's easier for the homeowner or policyholder to manage one policy as opposed to having to manage many different insurance policies. Imagine if you had one homeowner's insurance policy for your fire exposure, another for your wind exposure, another for hail, and yet another for vandalism or riot and civil commotion or theft. And then on top of that, you would have to have a separate policy to cover your liability exposure. With the homeowner's insurance exposure, all of it can be put into one policy. Let me mention before I go on some important notes. In the insurance industry, the term policy is equal to the term form. All standard forms we study for this and most other risk management courses, both at this university and others, are Insurance Services Office forms. The Insurance Services Office, or ISO, which by the way is now owned by Verisk Analytics and may eventually just be called Verisk, provides more standardized insurance policies than any other organization. Smaller companies, nearly all, use the ISO forms for property and casualty. Most larger companies use a variation of the ISO forms. This is an example of the ISO form's first page for the Homeowners 3 special form. And look at the bottom, it's hard to read, so I rewrote it for you. It says ISO Properties, Inc., 2003. This is directly from the appendix in your textbook. This is the same homeowners policy I referred to in the analysis of insurance contracts in the last discussion. Now let's begin our discussion of Section 1, the property section of the homeowners insurance policy. In Section 1 is Coverage A, the dwelling, Coverage B, other structures, Coverage C, unscheduled personal property, and finally Coverage D, loss of use. Then we'll also discuss some named perils, and we'll discuss Section 1 exclusions. So let's get started with a look at Coverage A, the dwelling coverage. Coverage A covers immovable or real property, as it's often termed. In other words, you should think of this as covering property which cannot easily be moved or picked up and taken to a different location. Immovable property includes things like the home itself, the inside and outside walls, and anything attached to the home. This coverage, coverage A, is the basis of coverage amounts or limits for all the other coverages. So in other words, the limit is based on the insurance appraised value of the home. For example, if the home is worth $200,000, that will be the coverage A limit, and the limits of coverage B, C, and D will all be based off of that $200,000. We'll discuss that further as we get to each coverage. There used to be either no deductible or a small flat deductible on coverage A, but now it's common to have 1, 2, 5, and even 15% deductibles. All of these are percentage deductibles. So even a 1% deductible on a $200,000 home is $2,000. After Katrina, Rita, Gustav, and Ike, between 2005 and 2008, 15% deductibles became very common in South Louisiana. Again, just think of how much homeowners have to save in order to pay for a loss because of these high 15% deductibles. For example, if you have a 15% deductible and a $200,000 home, the insured would have to pay $30,000 before the insurer would pay anything. Insurance truly begins at this point to be there only to pay very high severity and very low frequency losses. Coverage B, other structures, is, as I said, based off the coverage limit of coverage A. It is 10%. So, if coverage A is $200,000, coverage B would give you $20,000 of coverage. Coverage B also covers immovable real property. The difference is that the property is unattached to coverage A, or to the main home. It must be separated by a clear space from the dwelling. For example, you might have a pool house, or a garage, or a mother-in-law quarters that is not connected to the main dwelling. Next, coverage C. This is your contents coverage, or unscheduled personal property. So this is your movable property, your furniture, your movable appliances, your computer equipment, your clothing, all of that would be covered under coverage C. The limit of coverage C is usually 50% of coverage A. And note that it covers property anywhere in the world. Even if you're in China or Africa or just anywhere in the world, your property is covered if it is damaged or destroyed by a covered peril. There are also special limits of liability that are more limited. Examples are a $200 limit on money, a $1,500 limit on theft of jewelry, not any other peril that causes the loss, damage, or destruction of jewelry, but on theft. Also, $2,500 on theft of firearms. Now let's look at coverage D, loss of use. Coverage D is 30% of coverage A. This pays additional living expenses if the home is not fit to live in. It pays for any necessary increase in living expenses incurred by you so that your household can maintain its normal standard of living. In other words, if you have to evacuate because of a fire, this would pay those additional living expenses that you incur. However, there are limits on how long this pays, and it only pays for losses that are caused by a covered peril. Therefore, if you have to evacuate, say, because of a flood, which is not a covered peril in most cases under a homeowner's policy, the additional living expense would not be covered. It will also pay for fair rental value if a part of the home you rent to someone else is not fit to live in. It also pays if a civil authority prohibits use of the home because of a covered peril to a neighboring property, such as a fire. Now let's look at named perils. These are the covered causes of loss under homeowners insurance policies. Some forms only cover the first 8 perils here. Another form covers all 16 named perils here. And yet another form, the special form, for certain coverages is an open perils policy, which means it covers everything except that which is specifically excluded. But let's look at the first 8 named perils, and then we'll look at the second 8. The first 8 perils are the only ones covered by the basic form, HO1. The basic form isn't even discussed in your text, but it's important for us to mention it because it's now commonly sold in South Louisiana because it is hard to get coverage there because of the hurricane exposure. Let's go through each one of the first 8 perils. Fire or lightning, windstorm or hail, which does cover hurricane damage, and this is an example of damage caused by hail. Hail can cause damage to siding as well as roofs. However, there's a lot of fraud in hail damage. Oftentimes, it's not even the homeowner that fakes the loss, but instead someone who's been called out to repair some minor roof problems. Insurance claims adjusters have found that roof repairers will cause significant damage to a roof just so that they can repair the entire roof instead of just a small portion. But insurance claims adjusters have become very adept at identifying fake hail damage. And tornado is also covered under the windstorm exposure. Next, explosion. Then, damage from riot or civil commotion. And damage from an aircraft. In other words, a plane crashes into your home. And damage from vehicles, which happens more than you might think. And smoke damage. So even when a fire only damaged a portion of your home, the entire home might have been damaged or destroyed by smoke. And vandalism or malicious mischief, such as tagging. Next, let's look at the second 8 perils. These are covered by HO2, 4, 6, and mostly by HO8. We'll go back over this when we go over the different policy forms. This is a video from Liberty Mutual that shows many of the perils covered. So I think it's interesting and it's kind of a funny video to watch. You've probably seen this commercial on television, so take a look at it when you go through the Prezi. The first of the second 8 perils is falling objects. Next is theft, which is, as you can imagine, a fairly important peril to have covered, but would not be covered for a homeowner that only carried HO1. Then, accidental discharge or overflow of water or steam. This is a covered peril, and it is distinct from flood because this has to occur from an appliance or other machinery or equipment in the household, not from an external body of water. Next, the weight of ice, snow, or sleet, which doesn't tend to be a significant peril in the South, but in the northern part of the United States can be a frequent loss. And sudden and accidental tearing apart, burning or bulging of boilers and machinery, and freezing of plumbing, air conditioning, or sprinkler systems or household appliance, and sudden and accidental damage from artificially generated currents. And lastly, volcanic eruption. So now you know the 16 covered perils. And now let's look at the Section 1 exclusions. Ordinance or law, such as a notice that no dumping is allowed or the requirement that your home be put up on stilts or blocks, this would not be covered. Damage from war or earth movement, in other words, earthquakes. Nuclear hazard and the associated damage. Water damage, this is the flood exclusion. Power failure, remember if the power failure originates from off-site. Intentionally cause loss, which we've also discussed. Neglect, we have discussed. And governmental action. Now let's look at Section 2, the liability section, which includes Coverage E, personal liability, Coverage F, medical payments, and also the Section 2 exclusions. Coverage E includes coverage for bodily injury for which an insured is legally liable, and property damage for which an insured is legally liable. Coverage E typically has a blanket limit, which is one limit per occurrence for property damage and bodily injury liability. We'll talk about split limits when we get to personal auto insurance, which typically do have split limits. The blanket limit is typically $100,000 but can be increased. It also covers defense costs. Defense costs do not use up the limit. The insurer may actually pay out $100,000 in damages to an injured party, which you were at fault for, but actually pay out an additional $20,000 in defense costs. Coverage F is the medical payments coverage. It is a no-fault coverage, which means that it pays for medical bills that result generally at your premises without regard to fault. In other words, your negligence or responsibility or fault need not be established. The limits, however, are usually very low. They range from $1,000 to $10,000. It does pay for bodily injury expenses like medical, funeral, dental, etc. to a person on the insured location with the insured's permission, and for the activities of the insured off location, and for the activities of an insured's resident, employee, or an insured's animal. Now let's look at the Section 2 exclusions, or the liability exclusions. These are motorcraft liability is excluded. There are lots of exceptions to this. For example, a motorized golf cart on or within the boundaries of a golf facility. In other words, if damage is done because of insured's use of a motorized golf cart that is within the boundaries of a golf facility, those damages would be covered under Coverage E. Also, a recreational vehicle owned by an insured on the insured location or off the insured location and powered by one or more batteries is an exception. Remember, an exception to an exclusion is actually an acknowledgement of coverage. Then, watercraft liability and aircraft liability and hovercraft liability. Also, expected or intended injury. So this is trying to not cover losses that are not fortuitous or beyond the control of the insured, and also to reduce moral and morale hazard. And business activities are excluded. Remember, though, that certain business activities are still covered, but liabilities resulting from the operation of a beauty salon or a lawn care service would not be covered. Professional services are also excluded, such as a financial advisor, an accountant, or a lawyer. And uninsured locations. This excludes liability that results from activities by the insured if they occur on a location owned by the insured, say a beach house, but not insured under this policy. And then war is also excluded, and liability from communicable diseases, which you can imagine the catastrophic potential that this would have if it was covered. Sexual molestation, which was an exclusion added when courts interpreted damages from sexual molestation as being unintended and therefore not excluded under the expected or intended injury exclusion, and liabilities resulting from controlled substances. Now let's look at insureds under the homeowner's policy. Those include the insured named in the declarations, including a spouse of the same household, even if he or she is not named in the declarations. Also, resident relatives and other residents under 21 and in the care of a person above, and a student under 24 and your relative, your being the named insured, who used to live in the house. So if a child is away at school, they are actually insured under your policy until age 24, and a student under 21 and in the care of any of the above. Now let's look at the different homeowners forms. HO1 through HO3 and HO5 and HO8 are for traditional homes. So there are 5 policies, 1, 2, 3, 5, and 8, that are for traditional homes. HO4 is for renters, and HO6 is for condo unit owners. Let's look at them individually. HO1 includes coverages A, B, C, D, E, and F, and covers the first 8 named perils only. HO2 covers A, B, C, D, and F, just like HO1, and covers the first 8 and the 8 additional named perils, just as I described them above. Then HO3 also provides coverages A, B, C, D, E, and F, just like 1 and 2. It is the most common form, and the form in the appendix in the RADA text. Now the RADA and McNamara text. But also, For coverages A, B, and D, it is open perils, meaning that it covers any peril except that which is specifically excluded. For coverage C, it covers losses from the 16 perils that are also covered by HO2, those 16 perils that I discussed above. So in other words, for the structure and other structures and loss of use, it's an open perils policy, covering any cause of loss except an excluded cause. But for the contents or unscheduled personal property, it only covers losses that are caused by the 16 named perils. Next, HO4. HO4 is the contents only or renters coverage. This provides coverages C, D, E, and F because there's no need for coverage A and B, which is the structure and other structures, because renters do not own a structure and other structures. It covers losses caused by the same 18 perils as named in HO2. Then HO5, which provides the same coverages as 1, 2, and 3, A through E, and is open perils for all coverages. Again, note that open perils means the coverage covers loss caused by any peril unless it is specifically excluded. It's important to note that when you have an open perils policy, even if it's just on coverages A, B, and D, you need to pay particular attention to the exclusions in the policy. Then HO6. This is the condo unit owner's form, or townhouse. This covers an owned unit that is attached to other townhomes, or it may be much like an apartment situation, the difference being that the owner actually owns the apartment. It also covers losses from the 18 named perils, and it covers built-ins, appliances, and cabinets, and loss assessments from the condo associations. Nearly every townhome or condo has a condo association that pays for things like fences and pools and any common areas of the condominium or townhome. When there is a loss to those common areas, generally the condo association will assess the homeowner. HO6 covers those assessments. Next, there's HO8. HO8 provides coverages A through F. It is a named perils policy. On coverages A and B, it pays repair cost instead of replacement cost. This is particularly good for older homes whose replacement cost exceeds market value and repair cost. And that's the end of our discussion of homeowners insurance.